Welcome to So You Want to Be a Real Estate Agent. This is season 5, Success Stories. And we have a special guest with us today that I'm really excited to introduce you to. Liz Rossof is joining us from the Denver metro area, and she is with Denver Nook. And she has some interesting things to share with us today. So I'm not going to spoil all of the topics for you, but one is something that's really in the headlines right now. And I think the general gist of what we're going to be talking about is really timely because it revolves around helping our buyers understand how to become buyers and how important it is to consider purchasing in a climate like the one that we are in. So, Liz, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm very happy to be here. I love the title of your
Oh, thank
podcast.
you. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. So, Liz, tell our audience a little bit about you.
Yeah, so I am in the Denver metro area. I've had my license for about 5.5 years now. I moved to the Denver metro area from the Bay Area of California, San Francisco. I was there for 20 years. My background before I got into real estate is in art and design, e-commerce, and a little bit of startup life, a little bit of everything, trying to keep it together and pay the rent in San Francisco. And moved to Denver and really fell in love with this town. It's amazing. Like there's great art, there's great design, there's a food scene that's just exploding. And when I moved, it was far more affordable than the Bay Area. And now it's more affordable, but not quite as well, not quite as more affordable. I should say it's gotten more expensive here in Denver. Um, but it's still certainly more accessible than some of the coastal cities.
Wow. So, you came into real estate as a relatively recent transplant
I
to the Denver
did.
area. What
I
was that like?
did. It was very interesting. People thought I had a lot of moxie, and I do. I learned the city very quickly, as you would have to.
Yeah.
And when I first started, I really was strategic about the brokerage that I joined, Remax Professionals, in the city properties office, right on Tennyson Street, which is a bit of a shopping district.
Oh.
And this office had incredible salespeople, had incredible brokers who were, consistently landing in the top 10, 15 out of the 500 agents in Remax Professionals. And the neighborhood was just great and had a lot of activity and pedestrian traffic. And I asked the managing broker at the time, I said, do you get much walk-in? And he said, no, not really. I think it's because, we're kind of north facing, and you'd have to like kind of walk through the parking lot to get to the front door.
Hmm.
So we don't really get that much walk-in traffic. And I said, would you be opposed to me rolling my desk out to the parking lot, to the curb
Oh
on the
my
weekends? And he said, yeah, you do what you need to do. And I did. I would roll my desk out.
God.
Um, and instead of sitting open homes, I would sit on Tennyson with my dog biscuits and my waters, and it was like Lucy in the Peanuts. Ask me anything
Oh
real
my God.
estate
Adopt you
advice.
in. Yes.
And it was great. And I got four buyers and a seller that way my first year, but actually in my first 6 months or so, because there's a lot of rental units right around there. And I really fell in love with the home buying process through that, and helping people who are first time home buyers or potentially even new to Denver really figure out how to create home and how to create their own niche or nook in Denver. And I just love that process. And we've had a very, very competitive buying market in Denver until just recently, last 18 months or so, when the interest rates have increased and buying has slowed down nationally. And it was cutthroat and crazy, and writing offers in the driveway of the home we just showed. But I loved it. And I was able to get people into homes and start them on that path to creating wealth, potentially intergenerational wealth for the first time in a while for them. And I love it. It's just the greatest thing in the world.
Amazing. That is such a great story. And I want to take you back to a couple of things that I think our audience would be interested in and would benefit from hearing about, starting with your decision to roll your desk out into the parking lot. And I am going to make all of my agents listen to this episode, because we're on Main Street here, and we have actually got pretty decent walk by and walk in traffic. And I'm constantly saying, sit out by the front window. We have a little cafe table out front with our listing book of all the neighborhood listings in it. People always stop at that. We've got these beautiful signs in the front window. So, as a brand new resident of that area, you had located your office and then you rolled your desk out. What had you done at that point to prepare yourself, or to educate yourself about the area that you had moved into?
Really, it was living and breathing and learning the city through the MLS. I was in the city for about a year before I got my license. I like really decided to commit to that, just about a year. And I've always been obsessed with real estate. You know, there's that SNL skit where people are up on their phones watching Zillow, like as if it were,
Yes.
you know, maybe something a little less family friendly on their phones up late at night. You know, I mean, that was me. Like, I love it. And you know, the apps and the interfaces now, it's so easy to understand a city by the kind of architecture that there is. You know, the costs of the homes, you can start to get an idea about the demographics potentially, and even the psychographics. You know, who wants to live in a neighborhood that's more condensed and is closer to shopping versus, you know, neighborhoods that have bigger lots and bigger homes and aren't so close to, you know, a coffee shop or that sort of thing. And really just absorbed myself in learning the city through real estate, learning the city through architectural history, what's being developed, what neighborhoods were there opportunities for potentially a first-time home buyer who wasn't afraid of a little, you know, elbow grease getting into a space, and creating some instant equity with little work, and, you know, potentially keeping that house as a rental in a few years and that sort of thing. So it's just house hacking is like a big part of my offerings too, just because I'm quite experienced with it. Living in San Francisco for 20 years, it was always chasing down a good lease, you know, and the master tenant who would, you know, sublet rooms or whatever, and understanding how, I mean, if you had an extra closet in your house in San Francisco, you could rent it for $300, you know. So it's just like figuring out how to make properties work for you. As a primary residence, and also as a potential investment for the future. So sorry, I don't know where the question was anymore. I just went,
I was
went on a
asking
roll.
how you learn the city. So through the
Oh yeah.
MLS, you said, and I have so many things I
Yeah.
want to ask you about that you just talked about. What else did you do to learn the city?
Yeah, and driving around and meeting people and talking to people and learning their stories, you know. And sometimes people would come by my desk and they'd be like, "Oh yeah, I've lived in this neighborhood for so," and sort of challenge me, you know, like, "What do you know
Oh,
about this?"
really?
And it was just like, "Well, you tell me, you know, this is
Love
my
it.
impression, but you tell me your story." And
Mhm.
then it was like immediately like those barriers would come down, and, tell me more about how you feel about the change in the city. What's positive about it? What is it created for you, and what are some of the pain points? And then ultimately some of the pain points is that they were worried that their kids wouldn't be able to afford the city, and they wanted to move to Texas where they could buy a house outright with the equity that they have. I was like, okay, well, I can help you do that. I did.
Right.
So
Um,
just getting to know people, getting involved with like the Tennyson Berkeley Business Association, which is the business association on that street, and you know, listening
mhm.
and moving through the space.
Love it. Love it. Okay. So you did MLS research, you talked to people, you listened to what they said, and you got involved. I think that's another
Mhm.
big piece that is so important. You did like all of the different pieces. I love too that you said that when someone would say, well, that's maybe they disagree with you, or that I've been here X amount of years and challenged you, instead of going, well, that's not what I heard. You said, tell me more. I want to understand your story. What's your story? And then you connected that way. That
Mhm.
is spectacular. That's spectacular. I want to ask you, you said before when you were in the MLS, you were starting to identify neighborhoods in which first-time homebuyers might be able to gain some equity through like elbow grease
Mhm.
work. How did you identify those neighborhoods?
Well, they're the neighborhoods where, there's some homes that are selling for clearly a significant amount more money than the other homes. So
Okay.
finding out why, is it
Okay.
because the
Yeah.
lot is bigger? Is it because the zoning allows for something more potentially larger to be built on that lot in the future? What is happening in that neighborhood? And is it, so it's like, okay, there's two homes, both built in the 1950s, both on the same size lot, more or less the same configuration and size. And some of them are selling in the, seven, 800s. And here comes one along at, 525. Well, you can probably assume that there's some things that need to be addressed. So
Mhm.
let's go look at it. Let's find out what it is. And if it's simply because it needs a fresh lick of paint and, some new cabinets, well, let's get in there and, over time, you'll replace the lighting. Over time, you'll get these things done.
Mhm.
And, in 5 years, when you're ready to move into something bigger, now you have something that is equal to that $250,000 starting point. Now you're looking at something that you can sell and make a decent amount of equity in, or pull a HELOC out and help you buy a bigger place, use that for a down payment, and what can you now rent it for,
Mhm.
and become the landlord that you used to write those checks to every month.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Were you up against investors ever when you were representing buyers in
Oh
this
dear,
situation?
yes.
Yeah. How'd you
Actually,
handle that?
at the height of it, that's really interesting. I was helping first-time home buyers, a young couple. They had, a really pretty substantial amount of money to work with. And I went in and they really liked this home. And I said, hey, look, here's the thing. I know that we can beat the other end user um, yeah,
Investor.
buyers,
Yeah.
the people who are coming in to buy their own home. Like, because
Oh, the non-investors. Yes, yes. Okay,
yeah,
gotcha.
the non-investors. I
Yeah.
know we can beat the non-investors, but if there's an investor, like I know what the investors will pay for this place. And if you're willing to pay that, we can write that offer. The only way you'll lose it is if theirs is cash, full cash,
Yeah.
and no inspections. Because even though the house was totally great, there wasn't really anything that needed to be done. It was sitting on a lot that they could build a triplex on. And so just doing the math backwards, I knew that an investor would probably pay like close to 950 for it. So I
Mhm.
was like, let's go in 960, you know. And it was really funny because the listing agent actually called me. She was like, this is a very interesting offer. It's significantly higher than all the other buyers,
Mhm.
just residential buyer offers.
Mhm.
And it is the same as what I think is an investor offer for full cash because they're waiving inspections. And I
Oh,
was like, yeah, I know. I knew that's the only way we would lose it. And that was at the time when people were, bidding
yes.
crazy amounts of money over
Yeah.
the ask. But I also knew that it would appraise for that much because
Mm.
of the zoning and the land value.
Yeah. Yeah. I actually had a similar experience. This was with a listing of mine. And it was that exact house that needed like lots of TLC. And was so we priced it that way, fully expecting to get mostly investors interested. And this was a home being sold, it was an estate being sold by the kids. And the buyer who wrote the offer, the agent left a note, so didn't send it through me, left a note in the mailbox for the seller's kids to get, thinking probably it was the seller. I don't know if she knew the situation, but
Mhm.
wrote about what the buyers, because we can't really do that anymore. The buyer
No,
love
no, no,
letters,
no, love
but
it.
they circumvented us and went right to the mailbox and
Wow.
wrote the story of how they envisioned their family living in that house.
Yeah,
That's the house. And it was kind of similar. It was just a hair above what the investors were offering.
right.
And also didn't have any contingencies or inspection. But the seller rather chose that because of that like emotional pull, and it was an emotional
Right.
transaction for them. So interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, that is very interesting. I also do work with some investors. So I can't like be too hard on them
Right.
because
No.
they've paid several of my bills. But I understand the mentality that they're coming from. So it's like I understand a bit better what the competition is for those buyers who are looking for sort of those property opportunities that could be nice holds.
Yeah.
Um, and the investors, it's like if the math works, the math it's like totally unemotional. It's like either works or it doesn't work.
Exactly.
They're either gonna do it or they're not gonna do it, which
Yeah.
is great because they're very easy to work with in that way.
True.
Um,
Yeah.
and then it's also nice to know on and have that experience as a broker, to have that experience and really that understanding of how they think. So when I find those properties with a buyer that's, end user going to live in it, I can set realistic expectations with them.
Yeah. Did you learn about that investor mentality and how the math works by working with investors or through some other means?
Yeah, working with them,
Okay.
working with them for sure.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. So don't shy away, audience who's listening, from working with investors because you think you're not, educated enough, perhaps because you'll learn by working with them, and lean on your broker or team leader, I think, for their insights as well. Now, let me take you back to something else you said, which was that the market shifted when interest rates shifted. And I
Hmm.
think a
Hmm.
lot of people listening right now are having the same experience and have had the same experience. I just listened last week to a business planning, I guess I watched it, webinar, where this was one of the Tom Ferry Ecosystem's top coaches. Debbie Holloway is her name,
Hmm.
fantastic mentor and very experienced in every realm of real estate. And one of the things she started with was, if you are not succeeding right now, the problem is not the interest rate. You can't blame the interest rate.
Hmm.
Now, we know the interest rate did change the market, but in your opinion, how did it change what we as agents need to do?
Yeah. Well, I think, and it's interesting in Denver, it hasn't really shifted the market. I mean, yes, from being insanely seller heavy, not even time to put the sign in the yard, um, to being a little bit more balanced, but we still only have like 2.5 months of inventory. Our inventory is still pretty low compared to where it has been. So I would say it's just a lot slower. Um, and it the interest rates are challenging. So I sort of disagree. I do think that people will see like end of year numbers, brokers probably getting a little lower, although I think this year I'm probably coming out close to average. But I think being able to speak with your buyers and speak with your sellers about how it has changed things. So sellers needing to be really ready to perhaps help their buyers with 2-1 buy downs or some kind of incentives for helping them with their interest rate. And with the buyers really explaining that, your interest rate is temporary. You don't have to, I hate that. What do they say? Date the rate,
Take the
marry the
rate,
house.
marry the house. Yes, yes.
Like the worst. It's
Very
like
overused at this point. Yeah.
clearly a man came up with that because that's just so gross to
Never thought
me.
that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm sure you're right. Yeah.
Sorry, I love men, but I'm just saying, like, sometimes your sense of humor is a little off. Um, but it is a temporary number.
Mhm.
You go into a loan, and I'm more conservative. I like that 30-year fix because I like knowing what I'm looking at, or a 2-1, so I know where my ceiling is at least. But you've got to think about if you can afford it, just get what you can afford at this point, and you're gonna be better off because either interest rates will continue to rise and you will wait 2 decades, as people did in the 80s, for interest rates to come back down, and they've wasted all that money on rent, or interest rates will come back down, which we're all hoping they will, and I think they will, but they're not going to get back down to less than 3 or even under 4, I doubt, in my lifetime. But you have the opportunities then to refinance, and that's just going to be more money in your account every month. So, it's still important if you're thinking about your long-term wealth to be a homeowner, to be a property owner.
Yeah.
That doesn't change. So, people are speculating, oh, well, now is a really great time because the interest are going to come down and there's going to be this explosion again of increase in pricing and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, maybe that will happen. Maybe it won't. But what's important is right now, you're paying rent. So there goes your couple thousand, maybe many $1,000s a month right out the window, doing nothing for you. So if you can find the house that you can afford for the same amount you're paying in rent, you're going to be far better off
Yeah.
in the long and short term.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you talk about first when you are engaging with a first-time home buyer?
Well, first I like to, wave the magic wand and what would you love to have? And then it's like, well, let's talk about what you can afford. Like, have you talked with a lender? Because this is all very fun. I wanted a Barbie dream house my entire childhood. I never got one. Not because my family couldn't afford one, but because the lenders, my parents, didn't think I qualified. I don't know. They wouldn't give it to me. They didn't want me to have it. So the people who were in control of the money in my house
Right.
did not want that in their house. So the people who are in control of the lending do not want that in their portfolio. Who knows? So, you can think like, oh yeah, well, sure, I pay $4,000 a month in rent. That would be a mortgage. It's like, you got to get with somebody who's going to examine this. And if you can't get there yet, they can help you figure out how to get there. So what do you need to pay off? What do you need to do to get you where you are? Or let's look at what you can afford. I don't spend too much time. I'm very practical. I don't spend too much time talking with buyers who haven't been qualified or don't have a realistic grasp on their financial situation, because the bottom line is, what do you got? And how are you going to make what you've got to get you to where you want to go? So
Yeah. Now, do you do that by asking, have you talked to a lender, or do you do any kind of like personal qualification or run numbers with people at all?
Not really. It's not my wheelhouse, and I don't want to get too deep in the woods with them.
Yeah.
But I'll say, sometimes people have very big gifts coming from family members, which is great. We've got a lot of older parents now, boomer parents of the Generation Y, Generation Z, or like older Gen Xers who might have more money.
Yeah.
Um, more equity in their homes, willing to take out those HELOCs and helping their kids. And so those who are fortunate enough to be in that situation, like we've got to get all of that together. And it has to be documented because you can't submit an offer without that. It's a waste of time. It's a total waste of time. Go to as many open homes as you want while you're fantasizing about these things. But when you're ready, let's get the numbers in order. And we've got to prove to your seller that you're ready to get there. So that means we have to have a qualifying letter. We have to have proof of funds. A lot of people get a little bit uncomfortable with the proof of funds. I'm like, okay, I'm sitting on a $500,000 house. I have 3 people who are interested. They all more or less give me the same offer, but one of them has showed me that they have the money to get to closing
Mm-hmm.
by their lender letter and a bank letter or even a bank statement that shows that you've got plenty of money to get to pay off all your closing costs.
Yeah.
You're going to pick that person.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. What does that communication look like between you, your buyer, and the lender at that first consultation? If someone says to you, "Oh, well, Liz, you don't know, we haven't yet. We're just starting out. What's your next move?"
Well, I have to introduce them to 3 lenders. I don't know if that's a federal regulation or if that's a
Not that.
Colorado
That's in Colorado.
regulation, or maybe it's even just a suggestion. I don't know, but it's what we're supposed to do. Or we not, I should say, we don't have to introduce them to 3 lenders. We have to give them 3 lenders' names.
Okay.
So I usually say, like, here's 3 lenders that I've worked with, and here's one that I've worked with most frequently. I always encourage them to talk to everybody. I encourage them. My lenders probably don't like me for this. I'm like, put them against one another. I'm like, fine, get the best rate. Like, my fiduciary responsibility is to my client.
Yeah.
And if the lender that I love the most, and they know that I love them the most, if he can't do it,
Yeah.
it's not my
Yeah.
problem.
No,
We're
I
not going to
get it.
lose love. We're
Yeah.
going to
Right.
continue to do a lot of deals together.
Right.
But, my job is to make sure that my client gets the best rate, the best terms, and the best people advising them about it who can really look, because you get those. They're so confusing, and none of the banks write them the same way. They don't even
Right.
put the same thing in the same line. You can't just pop them into an Excel spreadsheet and have confidence that you're getting all the information. They're confusing.
Yeah.
They're confusing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but just getting with really trusted advisors in that way.
Makes sense. If someone is renting,
Mhm.
what is your general timeline for them? Someone comes to you and maybe they've got, 6 months left in a lease. How are you advising them to proceed at that point?
Yeah. Well, at that point, I say, is it a rental management company or is it just a mom and pop renting to you?
Mhm.
Because if it's just a mom and pop and you've been a good tenant, you might be able to open up a conversation and get out of the lease. Even if it's a management company,
Yeah.
talk about it.
Mhm.
Find out, are they willing to be flexible with you? And if they are not, and they know that they want to stay in that place for 6 months, then the conversation is, okay, can you go month to month? Because if we miss the window, what are we looking at? So generally it's going to be 3 months before that lease is up, maybe
Mhm.
4 months. Start getting qualified. Let's know what we want. Let's get your lock and shop, and start getting serious about this. Because if we close at the beginning of the month, then you don't have to make a mortgage payment for 2 months, and then it can kind of feel, even though it's not really, because you're bringing more interest to the closing table, but it can feel like you're not double dipping on a month. Or
Right.
like, can we budget for a double dip, which makes a move a lot easier if you want to do some painting, if you want to do some zhuzhing, um, you know.
Yeah, yeah, good advice. Good advice. Now, you mentioned house hacking before, and
Mhm.
we've done an episode on house hacking, so we dove pretty deep into it, but we didn't talk about it in terms of working with someone who might be interested in house hacking as a buyer.
Mm.
So if
Mhm.
someone has heard that term and comes to
Mhm.
you, maybe they're a first time home buyer and they're like, we want to buy this house and we're gonna use it to house hack. What's your next step there?
Oh, I just get really excited. My next step is to try to contain my enthusiasm. Um, yeah, so if they have a specific house in mind, already, they've brought me the house, I would just make sure that I can direct them. I can't like not legally supposed to tell them anything, but like here, like you need to contact the short-term rental licensing in Denver, figure out how to do that. Or do you have roommates that you're bringing with you? You know,
Mhm.
what's that going to look like? How are we going to structure this? Um, or, you know, if they haven't found one, I know the neighborhoods where those homes exist, where you could potentially have an in-law unit in your basement, which would allow under current short-term rental laws in Denver, you would be able to do that. Our first home had a single back entrance, and we would go up to our kitchen, an old bungalow, and down to our washer and dryer that then had another door to a very nice size, I don't know, 800 square feet, one bedroom, beautiful bathroom, no kitchen. So we just put a little cart with a microwave and a coffee maker, but it was full all the time because we were a half a mile from the convention center and it was $80 a night and it
Wow.
was just constantly full. But they had to go through our backyard. And when we moved, we wanted a bigger place. It was COVID. We were driving each other crazy. I don't have any children, but I've got dogs and a partner. And we wanted a bigger house, but we needed a bigger place where we knew that we could have another in-law unit or something in the basement. And there are neighborhoods where there are bigger bungalows that were actually built for intergenerational housing and have like full kitchens in the basements and things like that. So just thinking about different ways to do that. Or you can't short-term rental two sides of a duplex. If you live in one, you have to have a long-term tenant, but maybe looking for an older duplex. Now that's where you do get into a lot of competition with developers because where there is a duplex, you can build a duplex. And some of those, you know, anyway, that can get complicated. But what does the long-term rent kind of income look like and how will that offset your mortgage? And if you can get a lease signed to start a few days after your closing, many lenders can count that as income
Yes.
and count it against your debt to income ratio. So
Mhm.
if you've got a friend who also has a lease coming up and you
Mm.
want them to be your tenant, get that documented now. And through the process, that's going to help you qualify.
Yeah, yeah, great information. And I know it sounds a little complex probably for those who aren't knowledgeable about house hacking. And there are some moving pieces. And as Liz said, you kind of have to know what the regulations are. Is there any easy way for an agent who's interested in learning more about this, like even just to learn what the local regulations are around short-term rentals?
Ooh, I mean, I would just Google it. I mean, maybe there's a podcast. Maybe there's probably a book on house hacking. I don't know. I haven't seen it. I just have my own experience. I would get with a broker. I mean, some brokerages here in town really, that's kind of what they lean into.
Hmm.
And that's like all they do, or what that's sort of how they've promoted themselves, at least. So I would find mentors, people who know what they're doing. I mean, mentors are really are the most priceless thing
Yeah.
in this industry. And if you're not in a brokerage where you're feeling supported and getting good mentorship, you need to change because you will never be able to grow to where you want to be unless you have people around you that are there or beyond that.
Mm.
You just won't. You
So
have to
true.
have guidance and mentorship, and there's some the ninja courses. I love
Oh,
the
yeah.
ninja courses.
Yeah.
And one of them is like saying there's a, you know, a little truism about not begrudging the master.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you
Right.
have to put your ego aside, put yourself in check, understand that you have a lot to learn. Doesn't mean that you aren't valuable and you can't be helpful with what you do have,
Mhm.
but being really certain about what you know and what you need to know is really important. Because if you're out there saying you've got something that you don't, it's going to be a mess.
Absolutely. I so agree with you. And staying in that kind of like growth mentality, so important. I think throughout our careers, I recently heard, and this might apply to people who have had some modicum of success in this really crazy market that we've just come out of. And now maybe they're feeling deflated or at sea because they're not sure what to do. I thought it was a great quote, or I read it, I guess somebody had posted it. It said something to the effect of, quick success creates ego. Slow success
Mm,
creates strength.
mm,
I think there have been a lot of agents recently who have had that quick success. And, there's no shame in having to
mhm.
sit there and admit that maybe that created some ego for you. And it's maybe time to let go of that ego, which then will remove a potential blockage to growth and learning. That's so important in order to
Yeah,
succeed in a market like this one.
absolutely. You have to lean into the learning right now.
Yeah.
You know, if you're scared, you know, you're not the only one who's scared right now. But you gotta, what have you been doing right? You
Yeah.
know, and get with your people and
Yes.
let them know you're still here. And actually, one of the best pieces of advice was I was like, oh my God, how am I gonna talk to my buyers that bought in 2021 and now it's 2022 and they're totally freaked out that maybe they overpaid. And then there was like, well, did they overpay?
Right.
I'm like, oh no, they didn't. Because if you look at what they would be paying for the same mortgage
Mhm.
that they are locked into for 30 years,
Mhm.
they would be paying almost twice as much. And that's all interest. That's just the money that goes away and doesn't come back necessarily.
Exactly. No, they did very well. I mean, they did.
Yeah. So it's like, yeah, go call them. And, you know, if they're panicking, call them and let them know that they don't, you know, just call them before they call you,
Yeah.
you know, like, okay, yeah, right. They're great. They did the right thing. I helped them do
Exactly.
the right thing. I'm going to call them and let them know that before they can call me freaked out that, you know, the neighbor's house sold for $5,000 less than their comparable house this
Love
year.
that.
It's
I love
not a
that.
big
Yeah.
deal.
To
You're
help them really
fine.
understand. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, we're close to, I think we're maybe
Yeah.
overtime, but I want to
Oh,
ask you
goodness.
about one more thing. This has been
Hmm.
so great. Um, speaking of fear, this whole NAR lawsuit situation, which
Hmm.
I think is starting to make headlines. At first, it was making the biggest ripples just within the real estate professional
Yeah.
industry, and now I'm starting to hear consumers talk about it a
Mm.
little bit. And I think it has really pointed up more than anything the importance of being a skilled buyer's agent, which obviously you bring a humongous amount of skill to what you do, knowledge and insight. What are your thoughts about that lawsuit? What would you say to a new agent starting and feeling nervous, or who has just gotten into
Yeah.
homeowners, and also a buyer who might be curious about what's going on?
Yeah, absolutely. So I feel like I've always been super transparent. We talked before we started recording. The contracts in Colorado are written in a way that it's pretty clear that all of these items are negotiable. And you know, I say, you know, here's what my expectation is that the seller will be paying me this amount. And if they don't, I'm going to check this box that says you're going to be responsible for paying me the difference so that when I write the contract, I can let the seller know that I expect them, not you, them to pay me this amount.
Mhm.
Now, if they push back and whatever, we can come back and negotiate this. I'm like, here's the number one thing that's important to understand. I'm never going to stand in the way of you getting the house that you want. My commission is never going to get in the way of that. That's because I take a lot of pride in what I do, and I would rather get you into the house than fret about a few $1,000s. It's just not who I am.
Yeah.
So, we'll cross that bridge if we get to it. I've always been really clear. There's a lot of people that say, is it true that the buyer doesn't pay their broker? And I was like, well, here's the thing. There's a line item in the closing docs that come from the seller, and that money comes from the mortgage that you just signed your life on, and you have to pay that mortgage back. So yes, the line item comes from the seller, and all the money that's coming to that table somehow is coming from you. So no, you are paying me. In the end, you are paying me. You are facilitating my payment. And then people are like, oh, well, why would I work with a broker when I can work with another brokerage that gives you money back at the table or something like that? And I was like, well, some of those I think they've changed their way that they pay their brokers just recently, and as a result of this lawsuit, but they had been hourly workers. And I'm like, look, I am in this with you. I don't pay my bills until we get to the closing table. Am I going to force you to get to the closing table? No, because my goal actually isn't to get you to the closing table. My goal is to get you and all your friends to the closing table. I want to get you, all your friends, all your family, everyone you've ever met, people you cross paths with at the grocery store. I want to get all of them to the closing table. And if you don't have a stellar experience with me and feel like I have advocated for you the entire length of the contract, that's not going to happen. So I'm not going to push you into something that you don't want. In fact, I'm probably going to tell you to walk away when you're still holding on. So yeah.
Beautiful. Wow. Well said. And no wonder that you are the success story that you are, because that kind of mindset, that kind of ethic that you come to your client experience with speaks for itself, and obviously gets you repeat, return, referral clients that sing your praises. Awesome. Awesome. Liz, thank you so much for everything that you have shared today. I
Thank
know people are going to
you.
have questions for you, probably especially around house hacking. And there might be
Yeah.
people out there who want to move into your area or just want to know more about working with you. What's the best
Yeah.
way for people to find you?
They can find me at my website, denvernook.com, or just send me an email, liz@denvernook.com.
Wonderful. Awesome. Liz, thank you so much. This has been a delight. It's been great getting to know you. And thank you, everyone, for listening today. We so appreciate you. This has been So You Want to Be a Real Estate Agent. We'll see you next time. Do you know one of the best ways to generate leads in real estate is through geofarming? The reason why is that so many buyers and sellers, over 63%, choose their agent based on their local expertise. If you're the local expert, the agent about whom everyone says, I see you everywhere, you are far more likely to secure the business in your farm than any other agent. And if you're interested in learning exactly how to generate leads, this book, Farming for Real Estate Agents, which is a blueprint for how to choose, cultivate, and dominate a geofarm, has a series of systems that you can plug into today to start generating leads for your geofarm and dominating your local market.